Thank you for joining us for this KRWG Election 2012 debate for Doña County District Attorney. We welcome Republican incumbent Amy Orlando and Democrat Mark D'Antonio. I'm Fred Martino. I will be moderating tonight's debate. The rules are very simple. The candidates have 60 seconds to answer the questions, and they're asked not to mention their opponent in those answers. The questions come from members of the College Democrats and Republicans at New Mexico State University. And we begin with College Democrat Brennan Loritzen.
The death penalty has been off the books in New Mexico since 2009. Is this something you agree with? Why or why not?
And our first response is from Amy Orlando.
Thank you. The death penalty, when it was enacted and when it was used, was meant for people like Terry Clark, who killed Dina Lynn Gore. She was a child and he had raped her and then killed her after raping her because she was a witness. It was also meant for people that kill police officers. And so the death penalty was available in certain cases for very brutal homicides and very brutal offenses. And so, yes, I would support it coming back, and I would support the death penalty, and as the district attorney, I would enforce it.
Okay. Mr. D'Antonio.
I disagree. I believe that the death penalty is an extreme measure, and maybe in past histories it had a certain use and certain utility. But nowadays, we're evolving as a society, and although I will say that if it was made law by the legislature, I certainly would enforce it. My personal views is that incarceration and rehabilitation is the best way to handle any kind of crime. It's important that we as a society have a holistic look at law enforcement, not only the victims, but also the people they affect.
And our next question is from College Republican Sarah Boma.
In recent years, several jurisdictions across the nation have decriminalized or deprioritized the possession and/or recreational use of marijuana. In your opinion, should New Mexico take similar steps? Why or why not? And
we begin with Mark D'Antonio.
Thank you. That's a very good question. As the DA, I'm responsible to enforce the laws. And I must enforce the laws on the books. I have no option but to do justice. However, you at home and you in the audience have the power to legislate and enforce your legislators to do your will. And someday, if in fact, with your help or whoever believes in that, becomes law that in fact marijuana is decriminalized, I will support that as strongly as I do the laws in the books now.
Ms. Orlando.
Having been a prosecutor, state prosecutor for 19 years, I would oppose decriminalizing drugs. I have seen that the effects that it has on family members, on children, and the fact that it is a pathway to stronger drugs. In fact, one of our cases or crimes that is on the uprising is children that are testing positive for drugs, meaning that they are around their parents when the parents are using drugs. And so the children are now being affected by that. We don't know those long-term effects. So I think that it is a pathway. I've seen the effect that it has on families, on members. They have to go out and steal. So no, I would not support it becoming decriminalized.
Okay, our next question is from College Democrat Miriam Armstrong.
Do you believe that children who commit dangerous crimes, such as murder, should be prosecuted as adults?
And we begin with Amy Orlando.
Thank you. Yes, I do. I've been, as I said, a prosecutor for 19 years, and I started out prosecuting juveniles. And in New Mexico, we're allowed to try juveniles as adults for certain violent offenses. And I prosecuted the Ashley Wax case, where her offender was a 17-year-old. He shot and killed her in front of her parents, and she died in her father's arms. And so I fought very hard and very strong for him to be prosecuted and tried as an adult. And in fact, he was, and he was sentenced to 30 years for prison. So I think that the way the law is written for certain offenses, it is important that we punish those juveniles because of the crimes that they commit that are adult-like and very violent.
Mr. D'Antonio.
I think each juvenile case has to be looked at a fact-specific basis. Being in the FBI, have investigated many types of cases. I understand better than anyone that two cases aren't alike. Also, in the Air Force, we had a large problem at Lackland Air Force Base with juveniles. Now, I believe, as my opponent does, that there are certain cases clearly that juveniles should be tried as adults and punished. But I believe strongly that each case should be looked on a fact-by-fact basis and not lump children into one big group.
Okay, and our next question is from College Republican Wesley Jackson.
While New Mexico is not a state with many laws that specifically address crimes that are committed based on hate, would you handle a hate crime differently from those committed on another basis if it were to come across your desk as district attorney?
Mr. D'Antonio.
That's a very good question. A prosecutor's duty at all times is to do it just and right, and they have to keep politics out of the decision-making process. So what a prosecutor does, as well as an FBI agent who investigates, they look at the facts, they marry it to the law, and they decide prosecution, who to prosecute, what to prosecute. A hate crime that's not specifically designed, like the federal laws have some hate crimes, I would treat that crime and prosecute that crime as exactly I would any other crime, because it's very tempting for a prosecutor to grab headlines and treat normal cases as hate crimes. I would avoid that complication.
Ms. Orlando.
It is an interesting question, and I think that if there were laws that were on our statutes that applied to hate crimes, I would definitely support them and fulfill them. We used to have a statute that was for elderly abuse, and if you hurt somebody that was elderly, you could have an extra punishment, and that was to protect our elderly. Our legislators decided to take that option away from us. So I do support having extra punishments, extra definitions that gives us more time to work with, such as hate crimes. Right now on our state statutes, not federal statutes, but on state statutes, there are no such provisions for that. But if it was an opportunity to, number one, legislate for it, or number two, support it as a prosecutor, I would.
All right, our next question is from College Democrat Javier Jaquez.
As of today, there have been 297 post-conviction DNA exonerations in the United States. It is an unfortunate and tragic reality. Innocent people go to prisons for crimes that they did not commit. What action would you take as district attorney to see that this does not happen under your watch?
Ms. Orlando.
Thank you for that question. What I would do is what I've been doing for 19 years is screening the cases and following the evidence. I've done it for 19 years, and I'll continue to do that. We look at what the evidence provides, what the evidence shows, what the witnesses are going to testify to, what the victims are going to testify to. If there's any scientific evidence, we look for that. We have to turn over anything that's exculpatory. So in 19 years, I have never had a case that's been overturned because of someone being proved to be innocent. And murder cases in New Mexico, under state law, are automatically appealed to the Supreme Court. So I've done numerous murder cases and had them reviewed by the Supreme Court. So while it's unfortunate that that has happened in other locations, I have been diligent to make sure that in New Mexico and in Doña County that has not happened. And we would continue to do that, follow the evidence.
Mr. D'Antonio.
When you see things from one perspective, as a prosecutor, you have a certain ideals and certain prejudices that are built in. When you see things from both views as a prosecutor and a defense attorney, you understand that sometimes innocent people are charged with a crime. The prosecutor has two main goals. That is to prosecute the guilty, but equally as important, his job or her job is also to protect the innocent. Now, in any case, I would review dealing with any kind of crime where there was even a hint of exculpatory information or a hint of evidence that a person found guilty of a crime was innocent. I would do everything in my power to rectify that, because that's my job. The DA's job is to always do what is just and right. Bottom line, end of the question. Thank you.
Okay, our next question is from College Republican Abraham Cavon.
Child abuse has been a subject of considerable concern and public anger in Doña County over the past few years. Does Doña County have a problem with child abuse? If so, what things need to be done to address such an issue?
Mr. D'Antonio.
Child abuse is one of the most horrible crimes. I think we all agree with that. And it has to be dealt with proactively. We cannot wait until a child is hurt before we investigate and arrest people. We have to have in place strategic planning that prevents child abuse before it happens. Now listen, folks, I understand that you can't stop all child abuse, but you can use parent education, law enforcement education, and stem the tide of this horrible crime. And what the prosecutors also have to do is when a child is hurt, you can't rush the news cameras and take credit for it. So I think we should vigorously investigate and prosecute crimes against children. But what we shouldn't do as prosecutors is capitalize on their pain and suffering by going to the media and exploiting their pain.
Ms. Orlando.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I have prosecuted, unfortunately, numerous child abuse cases, both physical and sexual, and also children that have been killed by their caretakers. I was one of the prosecutors that prosecuted the baby Brianna case. And I will tell you that the fact that the community, Doña Ana community, came together for that baby, and because she had nobody. We prosecuted 5 members of her family for killing of her. And because the community came together and adopted her, she has been remembered. And from that, we now have the baby Brianna law, which punishes parents that kill their babies for up to 30 years. Before it was just 18. So now we have the new law, which I think acts as a deferment for parents, which, as my opponent just said, also will act as a deterrent. We also, out of that case, came the Child Crisis Center, which allows parents to take their children to the Child Crisis Center, no questions asked, leave them there and get a reprieve when they feel like they're going to lose it or they have nobody else to turn to. So I do believe that we have to be proactive, but we have to punish and make sure we send a message to parents that hurt their children.
Okay, our next question is from College Democrat Michelle Mora.
To serve as district attorney, excuse me, you have to win the seat through a partisan election. While in that position, cases of a very political nature do present themselves. If a high-profile case involving political figures of your same party affiliation were to come your way, how would you handle the matter?
Ms. Orlando.
I would handle the matter as I have in the past years with my experiences. We look at the evidence and we prosecute it. I will tell you that in our office, I do not know who is registered, who's not registered. I don't know what police officers are registered, not registered, or what they're registered as. Victims come in. It is not a question that we ask, are you a Democrat or Republican or decline to state? So we prosecute them. If they commit a crime, we follow the evidence and we prosecute them. And I have prosecuted people, and right now am prosecuting people in Sunland Park that are political positions. And ironically, those calls that came to my office asking for the Sunland Park investigation to happen came from representatives and senators that were Democrat, while I'm Republican, but asking me to step in and help. So I think that the whole Sunland Park has been a very bipartisan investigation. Hector Balderas, the state auditor, came down and participated. So lots of times while it seems it's political, it's really not.
Okay, Mr. D'Antonio.
Ms. Moore, there's an issue called appearance of impropriety. And that means that if the DA looks like there's trouble or even looks like they're being fair or not fair, that prosecutor has an absolute moral and legal duty to separate themselves from the case. For example, as I understand the question, if somebody big in the Democratic Party was to be prosecuted right after my election, what I would do is I would use my state resources and I would ask another DA from another jurisdiction and county to fully take over the investigation and the prosecution of that case. This way, there's no appearance of wrongdoing, even though there is no wrongdoing. The public's confidence in their DA is paramount.
Okay, our next question is from College Republican Marissa Rouse.
The DA's office sometimes has to make decisions about prosecuting circumstances involving police officers and sheriff deputies. This sometimes involves the death of a suspect or the alleged mistreatment of a suspect. What steps would you make to take as a DA to prevent and handle these situations?
Okay, and we begin with Mr. D'Antonio.
You know, I've been in law enforcement my whole life, starting from the military to the FBI and through the Department of Justice. I know the close alliances that can be forged between the prosecutor and law enforcement. I've been both. I know how that works. The only way to ensure, again, to avoid that appearance of impropriety, which I was talking about just moments ago, is to have a neutral review board made of citizens and other professionals to look at each case. But folks, it just happens. Prosecutors and lawyers and cops, they work together every day together. Matter of fact, a lot of prosecutors and their staff are married to police officers. It's very hard to be neutral. So I suggest we give the duty and that responsibility to a board of qualified people who can make such determinations.
Ms. Orlando.
Well, I would handle those kind of cases as we have done for 19 years. As elected DA, it is our job to make the hard calls. You have to make those judgments. You cannot always farm out or pass off your duties to somebody else. We're being paid to make those hard calls. We have a task force here in Doña County that is comprised of all law enforcement agencies, and they go out and they are specially trained. They go to training and they learn how to investigate police officer involved shooting cases. And so it is nonpartisan, it's non-departmental, and they are as a team assess it, and there is a protocol for it, and then ultimately is presented to the DA's office where we make the review of the case and we make the call. And I would continue that process. I do not believe that a citizens review board would be effective, just like you wouldn't have a citizens review board that would review doctors' malpractice cases. Only doctors would know what doctors need to do.
Okay. Our next question is from College Democrat Miguel Sosa.
What administrative reforms, if any, are needed at the DA's office?
And we begin with Ms. Orlando.
Well, administrative reforms, we look at that every day. We look at, are we spending our taxpayers' money wisely? Our budget comes from taxpayers. We have a $5.2 million budget. I make sure that we are hiring the most experienced and the best prosecutors that we can get. We try and get career prosecutors, which we have out of 25 of our prosecutors. Many of them are career prosecutors with a lot of experience. We also review ways that we can cut edges, that we can cut our budget back. We have to balance that budget every year, and we have done that. And we've done that through different ways. So I do believe that administratively, it is an ongoing process. You can't just say everything's working today and then let it go. It has to be a constant review that has happened. And I've done that. Having a staff of 80 people and supervising 80 people, you constantly have to review and come up with new procedures.
Mr. D'Antonio.
We need some significant administrative changes at the DA's office. There's a real disconnect between the community and the DA's office. Everybody knows what the DA's role is, but what is the policy and strategy that the DA uses to perform him or her function? We don't have any idea in this community what the plan is. I think we need broad revision and broad reform. I think what the DA should do is set policies that are good for Doña County, that make Doña County a safer place. How do you do that? You hire people and let them do your job. You do not micromanage from the top. You know, in our DA's office today, a line assistant or a line attorney can't make a plea offer without running it through the high chain of command. That slows the process down. Also, this whole concept of jail is the only answer for every crime has to stop. There are many people who commit crimes who administrative, judicial, non-jail punishment would be appropriate.
And our next question comes from College Republican Trey Brion.
Most cases handled by the DA's office are settled by a plea bargaining process. Given that the court system in New Mexico and nationally are under serious financial constraints, are there any types of cases that you feel are not appropriately handled by the process?
And we begin with Mr. D'Antonio.
Plea officers are a necessary part of any judicial process. As an agent investigating cases, working with the prosecutor, as well as being a 10-year prosecutor right here in Las Cruces, you have to understand it's a necessary part of the deal. Now, minor cases that come in don't have to go through traditional prosecutive route. Minor offenses can be handled in a pre-prosecution diversion program such as we have now in place at the DA's office. Only I would expand that because we need more opportunities for people who run afoul of the law but are not criminals. And that's a very important distinction I want to make. Not all people who run afoul of the law are criminals. Our sons and daughters sometimes get in trouble. They don't need to be sent to jail. So I would expand our pretrial diversion program and keep crimes like minor shoplifting and things of that nature out of the court system and do it alternatively.
Ms. Orlando.
I do believe that, can you repeat the question one more time?
Yes. Most cases handled by the DA's office are settled by a plea bargaining process. Given that the court system in New Mexico and nationally are under serious financial constraints, are there any types of cases that you feel are not appropriately handled by this process?
Yes, I do feel that there's cases that should not be pled out. Those are cases involving children, child molesters, adult rapers, homicides. There's numerous cases, people that have many priors. So there's obviously violent cases that should not be pled out. Drug people that sell drugs in school districts. So there's a lot of cases that I think we do not plea out. But like my opponent was talking about, in our office as district attorney, we had a fast track program where we pushed cases through that of nonviolent offenders, people that needed a chance and needed to get just some help and not be in the criminal system. That unfortunately was stopped by a defense attorney, the defense bar, which my opponent is part of.
Okay, and our next question comes from College Democrat Brennan Loritzen.
The docket for judges in 3rd Judicial District Court is overwhelmed, and recent studies have shown that we are in serious need of more judges. However, with limited state funding available for added court staff, what alternatives does the court have to alleviate this problem? What things can the DA do to help?
All right, and we begin with Ms. Orlando.
Well, this kind of picks up where I just left off. The fast track program that we had, those were cases that were charged immediately in district court. They came, they had their arraignment, and they pled, and they were sentenced all in the same day. So those cases moved very quickly for the offender, for the court, and for both the defense attorney and the prosecutor. And so it was very efficient. Now, whatever reason, the defense bar decided they did not want to participate in that. So I am trying to reestablish that with the new head public defender, and we're trying to make that one of the options. We also have the pre-prosecution diversion program, which is an operation that runs out of the district attorney's office, and it is for people that are non-violent offenders, and they are supervised through probation officers out of the district attorney's office. And then once they complete their probation, they have no record. So again, that doesn't tie up the courts. So there's numerous programs that we have going now and thoughts that we could implement for future plans.
Okay, Mr. D'Antonio.
You know, the one thing I learned, young man, was in the military was that teamwork solves all the problems. And when I first came, started doing practice in front of state court, I couldn't believe how disharmonious all the branches of justice were. The judges weren't getting along with the DA's office, the public defenders weren't getting along with somebody else. In tough economic times, when money is really crucial and the administrative justice must carry on, we need collaborative cooperation between all the branches of the judiciary. And I would suggest to you that the DA, as the #1 law enforcement officer in Doña County, needs to take a lead role and embrace everybody in the community, the judges, the public defender's office, the police office, workers, social workers, and in a unified effort to all work together, lower the budget, and be more productive.
Thank you so much for joining us for the Doña County District Attorney debate. We are so pleased to have you with us, and we do want to remind you that local in-depth programming is only possible with your support. And this debate only possible because of the hard work of our students in the College Democrats and College Republicans at New Mexico State University. They worked hard on these questions, and it really shows tonight, so we thank them for their contribution. And our next question comes from College Republican Sarah Boma.
The United States incarcerates more people than any other nation on earth. Many incarcerated individuals have committed nonviolent crimes. Are there currently any meaningful alternatives to prison that can be used by the DEA's office to address this issue, both in-place alternatives and potential hypothetical alternatives that could be implemented in the near future?
Mr. D'Antonio.
The answer to that is emphatic, absolutely yes. We send too many people to jail. Now, as a prosecutor and as FBI agent, I put a lot of people in jail. Bad, nasty people that need to stay there. And I have no regrets about that, and I'll do it again in a heartbeat. However, there are minor cases that we have that people just don't need to see the inside of our jail, especially children. We have a gang situation in Las Cruces. I'm not going to call it a problem. We have a situation that needs correction. Now, putting our kids in jail does nothing but hurt us in the long run. We have many alternatives. There are community homes, there are diversion centers, there are all sorts of plans we can use if we work as a team. If the DA's office would just work hand in hand with social workers and others in the law enforcement and put alternatives on the books, such as not prosecuting these kids, but giving them drug courts and things of that nature.
Okay, Ms. Orlando.
Well, I believe that one of the reasons that we may have higher incarceration is because it takes longer for our judges to sentence people to prison. Sometimes swift action needs to happen. And the best example of that is recently, I think everyone's familiar of Adam Espinosa. He was a young man that was traveling from to California, and he stopped at the rest stop outside of Doña County, and he was killed by a juvenile. That juvenile had had 4 referrals, 4 violent criminal referrals, and been processed through the court and had not been sentenced. If he would have been in a detention home, then Adam Espinosa might be alive today. So I believe that the people that are in prison are there for a reason. They're sentenced by a judge after the judge looks at the entire case, at their history, and what needs to happen. So while it's unfortunate that we have that many people in jail, it is a necessity for the violent offenders.
And our next question now comes from College Democrat Miriam Armstrong.
Recent events in Doña County have brought into question the current process New Mexico uses to select judges. In your opinion, is the current combined appointed and/or elected process for judgeships in the state an adequate process, or are further reforms required?
And we begin with Ms. Orlando.
Well, the way that the process works now is there's a commission. When a vacancy becomes open, there's a commission, and people from the community are appointed to that commission, and then names are sent to the governor. I think that process works proper. Quite frankly, I think that people should just submit their names to the governor if there's an appointment, and that the governor, whoever he or she may be at the time, can appoint. And then they have to run in an election. So the initial appointment, I think that people should just be allowed to apply for it. I don't think there's a necessity for the commission. I think that brings in politics, but I do believe that they need to run in an election.
Mr. D'Antonio.
I disagree. When a judge sits for election, and he sits on the bench, and he knows that 3 months from the time he's sitting on the bench and he has to face an election, he or she is going to act different. They're going to take political considerations into their deliberation process, which can happen. Now, the federal system works much better. There, judges are appointed for life. They're immune from any kind of political controversy that happens day by day. And in my experience, having worked both the state court as well as Fed court, I've had the opportunity to kind of compare the two. And I will tell you that the federal system works better in that regard. The judges are more competent and more strident in their viewpoints. And they're not susceptible to day-to-day political affairs that happen. And they don't have to run as a Democrat or Republican either, so it's more effective. That's the change I would recommend.
And our next question is from College Republican Wesley Jackson.
As lawyers, what is your personal legal philosophy in regard to crime and punishment. What motivates your desire to prosecute crime?
And we begin with Mr. D'Antonio.
Prosecuting a crime is one half of a prosecutor's duty. The other half of that duty is to make sure that no innocent person is ever convicted of a crime. Now, that's a very good question, and I want to ask you a question back. People think that when they're a victim of a crime, they want justice, and they should have justice. But when their son and daughter is accused of a crime, they want a different aspect. So the prosecutor has to be fair to all people. The prosecutor represents everybody in Doña County, the victims as well as the accused. And it is my passion to make Doña County a safe place. And I know the way we make it safe is to be fair to all sides with no political agenda and no nonsense. A firm grasp on the law and a firm grasp on justice is what we need, and that's what I believe in.
Ms. Orlando.
Thank you. Well, I believe crime and punishment is the role of the district attorney. I believe in justice, and I believe for 19 years that is what I've been doing. And when you do justice, you screen out cases that are not, the evidence is not there. And you follow the evidence. You follow the evidence through to trial. And so I'm not going to apologize for my 19 years of being tough as a prosecutor on murderers, child abusers, child molesters, and people that kill children, people that hurt our elderly. And I disagree strongly with my opponent. There is three sides to the justice system. One is the judge who makes the legal decisions and the sentencing decisions. There is the defense attorney, and then there is the prosecutor. The defense attorney represents his client, the criminal, the person that is accused. The prosecutor represents the community and does the best interest and is the voice for the victims. And that's what needs to be, and that's what the district attorney's office and the DA is and what I have been.
Okay, this is the Doña County District Attorney debate. And if you're just joining us, the questions have been chosen by college Democrats and college Republicans at New Mexico State University. The rules are quite simple. The candidates have 60 seconds to answer the questions, and I will remind the candidates to please not mention your opponent in your answer. And we continue now with college Democrat Javier Jaque.
While most residents of Doña County will never be prosecuted by the DA's office, what role do you believe you play in their lives? Beyond serving as chief prosecutor in the county, what is your vision for the office of DA?
And we begin with Ms. Orlando.
That's a good question. As the chief law enforcement officer in the community, we go out every day to schools, to law enforcement. We teach, we explain what we're doing, we talk about procedures. I've gone throughout the state and trained on prosecuting child abuse cases. We also are involved in community activities. Our office raises money we just raised money for the Tough Enough to Wear Pink to give a donation from our office. We get involved with school-age kids to make them understand what the legal system is about. I think we are good role models, and we need to show them that they don't have to be afraid of our office, and maybe someday they'll want to grow up and be a prosecutor. I know the other day that after the debate, I was talking to a student, and she came up and she told me that I had inspired her and that she had wanted to be a social worker, and then after she heard that I was a social worker and then a prosecutor, that now she's thinking about she might want to go on and go to law school. So those are things that I think we influence our community.
Mr. D'Antonio.
The primary responsibility of the DA vis-a-vis the community is to keep the community safe and free from crime. That's the #1 duty of the DA's office. Now, the DA does that many ways. Certainly outreach to the community is very important. But what's even more important for the everyday person who's on the street is to know that the law enforcement officers that are patrolling our streets and making it safe are well trained and have good communication with the DA's office. Also, social workers in schools have to have an active responsibility in the whole process. As your new DA, I would make it one of my goals to have teachers, social workers, and other professionals to come out and to help us fight crime and do our jobs. You know, NMSU is a tremendous resource, very rarely used. We have a great criminal justice system here. And as your DA, I will use those resources to outreach to our community.
Our next question is from college Republican Abraham Kavan.
In many cases, judges are left without much discretion in how they choose to handle their cases of a certain nature. Do you believe that there is lack of judicial expression in certain types of cases? Do these matters require reform? If so, would you advocate for such reforms as district attorney?
Okay, and we begin with Mr. D'Antonio.
I would advocate for reforms because when you're in trial and you see that sometimes judges are handcuffed and restricted, especially in the sentencing process, the judge has two major roles. One, as a trial judge, to be like the traffic cop, to enforce the rule of law by both parties. But one of the most important roles a judge has is sentencing roles. His role to sentence people to jail or not. Now, if he doesn't have absolute immunity from pressure, in other words, if a judge is sentencing individuals a certain way and the DA's office doesn't like it, they can turn around and exclude him from cases. And that has happened in the past. That kind of external influence needs to stop. The DA's office has to respect the three branches of the judiciary: defense, judges, and the prosecution. And that's what needs to happen.
Ms. Orlando.
Well, in the state system, judges have complete discretion in sentencing defendants. Their hands are not tied. In any plea offers or plea bargains that are made, we do not tie the judge's hands. It is completely up to their discretion. There's a few statutes that provide for mandatory time, but other than that, their hands are not tied. Unlike the federal system, where there is a point system and the judges have hardly any discretion. And so I think that's the difference. So I really do think that our judges, and I think if you went and talked to our judges, they would say that they feel very confident that they're making choices every day, they're making decisions every day, and they're sentencing people how they feel appropriate. Both sides get to argue. Again, both sides get to do their job, the prosecutor, the defense attorney, and the judge, and then the judge makes the final sentencing decision.
Our next question from college Democrat Michelle Mora.
In many of the communities in the southern part of the county, there is an issue with gang violence and vandalism. As DA, what would you do to combat this type of problem?
Ms. Orlando.
Well, we've been working on combating that for a while, and we have some new ideas that we've come up. I just recently got endorsed by the Sunland Park Police Department, and they want a partnership with us. And interesting enough, one of their questions was about what can they do about the graffiti and the gang violence down there. And one of the things that we discussed was having a prosecutor go down to Sunland Park and be there with the police officers once a week to help advise them, help review their cases, help train them so that they're not always making that trip up here. And we also get to know their community down there. So we've already started along that line. Secondly, there are laws on the books, just like what we talked about in the question before, where judges have the opportunity to sentence graffiti gang members to certain sanctions. They can actually publish parents' names if their children have put graffiti on the wall. We don't ever see that, but that may be a deterrent that could be used, because I definitely think most parents don't want their names in the paper because of their child's graffiti. So I do believe that we're already being proactive in trying to implement some of these things, help the residents down in the southern part of our state.
Mr. D'Antonio.
Proactive enforcement of gang offenses shouldn't be happening now. There shouldn't be meetings now about it. This should have happened years ago. Because proactive investigations of gang is the only way to turn the tide in that regard. As an agent, I investigated many gangs, and I could tell you that good, well-trained officers can tell just by graffiti what's going on in the gang community. Now, you have to catch those kids early through training and through good law enforcement. Now, once again, folks, you cannot do it just by heavy-handed police work. You have to involve social workers, and especially the schools, which leads us back to truancy issues. If you can tackle truancy, and if you can nip that in the bud early through proactive cooperation with teachers and social work, you'll begin to stem the tide of gang violence. Now, again, you cannot stop all gang violence. It's impossible. But what we can do is save as many children as we can.
Our next question is from college Republican Marissa Rouse.
The use of synthetic drugs has recently gained media spotlight. There are many chemical substances that are currently not on the books. In theory, their distribution and consumption cannot be prosecuted. What options do we have for these situations?
Mr. D'Antonio.
Any drug that impairs one's ability to think and function needs to be studied, looked at, and potentially regulated. I would, as an advocate, as the DA, I would investigate those drugs, especially those new designer market drugs, which slide under the radar as far as law enforcement goes. Study those, make recommendations to our legislature, what needs to be enforced and what doesn't. It's that kind of, again, getting back to an old subject of community policing, working hand in hand with experts in the drug community and the law enforcement to make a cohesive strategy. That's what we need. Planning and strategy is a winning combination in law enforcement. Now, it takes sometimes the knowledge of how to investigate and how to prosecute to manage these issues. But that's a very serious issue, and some of these drugs are very dangerous, need to be studied, looked at, and the DA needs to take a leadership role.
Ms. Orlando.
Thank you. Yes, well, interestingly enough, I was on a commission last year to study the drugs, spice, the new drugs that are coming out, these synthetic drugs, because exactly what the question was the criminals know how to always change the ingredients to make it one step ahead of law enforcement. We have very talented and dedicated law enforcement officers in Doña County, and I was just involved in a raid that happened involving El Paso, Doña County, and Otero County officers. And they were very educated and trained, and they hit all the different shops looking for those bath salts and spice. And I would encourage parents to learn about those because they're very dangerous and dangerous drugs that are out there and being sold to your children, your elementary children. So I'm on a commission studying that, looking at how we make a reform in the laws so that we don't have to keep going back every year and changing it because a new ingredient is added. So I've already been proactive in that with the police officers.
Just another reminder of the incredible work that has been done by these students, college Democrats, college Republicans at New Mexico State University, coming up with questions like this on emerging issues, including drugs that aren't on the books, bedrock issues like how we choose judges and what exactly a district attorney does. They did a fantastic job, and I'm extremely proud to be here with them on this program. Very, very good job. And we begin on the next question now with college Democrat Miguel Sosa.
With the detention center consistently overcrowded, what is the DA's role in reducing the number of inmates?
And we begin with Ms. Orlando.
Well, what we've done is we try and look at, we have a committee that we've joined with the judges, with the chief public defender, and with the jail members. And we've trying to study how they can move those inmates in and out quicker. What our office does, and is being copied statewide, is when an inmate gets sentenced, there's a judgment and sentence that's produced, a J&S that follows them and tells them where they need to go. We do those in the courthouse so that immediately upon their sentencing, those documents are signed and ready to go, which means that we can move those people in and out of our jail system and get them either out or into the program or into the prison system. So we are trying to cooperate and work with the other agencies that are involved in managing the jail, which is the county, and helping to see how we can help to reduce that population or keep it moving.
Mr. D'Antonio.
Miguel, there's two distinct sentencing issues and jail issues. One is post-conviction when a person is actually sentenced, but there's a long period of time when defendants are in jail and they're under direct supervision and control of the DA's office, or at least they should be. Now, sometimes cases take 4 and 5 years to go to trial. A lot of times, those people sit in jail waiting for their time or their trial time. It's that time that if it can be reduced, we would save the taxpayers millions of dollars. It's your money that's being spent to house these people. If the individuals are being temporarily incarcerated, are not dangerous to the community or flight risk from justice, they don't need to be in jail. Doña County could save millions of dollars by overhauling its bail process to have only the most serious people who need to be in jail awaiting trial.
Our next question is from college Republican Trey Brion.
For individuals who cannot afford legal representation, they are provided with the right to a state-funded attorney. Do you believe that there is currently a lack of support and resources in the Public Defender's Office? If so, what additional resources do you feel are needed?
Mr. D'Antonio.
Well, I'm uniquely qualified to answer this question because, as you know, I've worked both sides of the aisle. Primarily as a prosecutor, but the last 5 years I've done a lot of criminal defense work. And I will tell you right now, the sides are very uneven. The prosecutor office is much more well funded, much better staffed, better accommodations, better everything. The public defender's office is languishing way behind. Matter of fact, in one case, the DA's office had to give the public defender's office, they used office equipment, computer stuff just to have them survive. We need parity because, folks, even though someday your child, your family may be accused of a crime, and you want to have your child to have the best legal representation. If you're poor or disenfranchised and can't afford a high-priced attorney, you need to have the same good lawyering as anybody would have.
Ms. Orlando.
Thank you. Well, having been a state prosecutor for 19 years, I believe that there's been times that the Public Defender's Office has been understaffed and underfunded. And it was actually during my tenure as a prosecutor here that we provided computers, we provided equipment so that they could communicate with our office and get disclosure done. So that was done under the time that I was at the DA's office in the past 19 years. On top of that, though, I will say that the Public Defender's Office has very trained and educated people. They're dedicated to doing criminal defense work. That's what they've chosen to do. And so to say that if you can only pay for a high-priced defense attorney, I think that the public defenders are just as talented, just as dedicated. That's the job they want to do. That's the job they've selected to do, and they do a good job. And so I believe that at times they've been underfunded, but they've always been adequately prepared and good attorneys.
Our next question from college Democrat Brennan Luritzen.
What is your experience in criminal law? What is your success rate?
All right, we begin with Ms. Orlando.
My experience in criminal law is I've been a prosecutor for 19 years here in Doña County at this district attorney's office. I started with juvenile cases and worked up to homicides and handled some of the more high-profile cases that have happened in Doña County. I was involved in the Baby Brianna case. I tried the Carly Martinez case, the Katie Sepich case, the Ashley Wax case. I probably have done over 150 to 200 jury trials in state district court. I've handled thousands of cases, screened thousands of cases. So I have very extensive knowledge and handling of state court cases. What was the second part of the question?
What is your success rate?
Our office has an overall success rate of 97% conviction rate. And I'm proud of that. We have 25 attorneys, and I think that that shows that we are doing justice, we're screening the cases, we're following the evidence, and we're returning with a 97% conviction rate.
Mr. D'Antonio.
Is criminal justice your question, sir? The whole?
Criminal law.
Criminal law. Criminal law encompasses the whole gamut of law enforcement, from investigating a case to ultimately prosecuting a case. My experience is I was a law enforcement officer in the military for 4 years. After that, I was an FBI agent in Washington, D.C. for 3 years when I was asked by the powers that be at the Department of Justice to work in the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. I have done every type, investigated every type of law enforcement case there is. And I prosecuted almost every case. For 10 years, right here in Doña County, I was a federal prosecutor. And I handled complex matters. Also, as an FBI agent and at the Department of Justice, I worked very hard implementing issues of border security. And so, and my success rate, very good.
All right. Our next question is from College Republican Sarah Boma.
Why should the people take note of this race? At the end of the day, does it matter if a Republican or a Democrat is the district attorney?
Mr. D'Antonio.
Sarah, I don't think it matters whether a Democrat or a fair-minded Republican, or a fair-minded Democrat for that matter, be the district attorney, because the politics has no place in the DA's office. Now, we are committed under the system to run as a Republican or Democrat, but once you get to the job, you have but one duty and one loyalty, and that is to the people of Doña County. Whether you're black, white, Hispanic, rich, poor, Republican or Democrat, you have a duty to see that justice is done. Matter of fact, that is the sole and absolute responsibility of the DA, is to do what is always just and what's right. And the problem comes in when people start interjecting politics into the decision-making process. Once that happens, the process gets corrupted and bad things happen to the people of Doña County.
Ms. Orlando.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. I would say that whether you're Republican or whether you're Democrat does not matter in this race. We need all people to come out and exercise their right to vote. That's what's important. And the reason that this race is so important is because it does depend on the community safety. The district attorney is the chief law enforcement officer. I have received the endorsements of all law enforcement agencies, to include Las Cruces Police Department, the Sheriff's Department, the firefighters, the FOP, Sunland Park, the Department of Transportation, and the Sun News. And the reason I have received that is because I'm a team member with the community and with law enforcement. Even more than that, I am dedicated to justice, dedicated to victims. I have been the voice for victims. I have sat with victims and held their hand when they're waiting for a verdict to come down. And I will tell you that the day after the race, I could walk in and try a case with a child that had been molested that's 3 years old. That's the kind of district attorney that our community needs.
Our next question is from College Democrat Miriam Armstrong.
As district attorney, what will you do to make Doña Ana County a safer community?
Ms. Orlando.
I continue to do what we've been doing for the past 19 years. We partner with the community. We have a close working relationship with Children, Youth, and Families. We have a close working relationship with FYI, with the Child Crisis Center, with La Piñon, with the police departments, as I've said by my endorsements. So we would continue to do that. We go out and I train, my office staff trains the police academies every year, the Sheriff's Academy and the Police Academy. We make sure that we are involved. So by educating and being involved and joining with the community and making sure that everybody knows what resources are out there, I think that's one of the things. Under my administration, we started a program called SAFE, which is Starting Today, a Future Without Violence, which addresses bullying and domestic violence, whether it's teenage and adult violence. And that's to get the education out there and let people know that they don't have to stand for being bullied. They don't have to stand for being beat up by their spouse. So I believe that all those programs will help keep our community safe.
Mr. D'Antonio.
Miriam, any student in government will tell you that any agency, organization that's the same for 19 years is stale. They lose focus. They don't have new ideas. What Doña County needs more than anything else is a new, vigorous approach to crime fighting. We need a strategy that is clear and defined and the public is aware of. Now, proactive law enforcement is the key to success. With shrinking budgets and shrinking everything else, we need Doña County and the DA's office to all hold together and make one effective machine. We need new blood, we need new ideas. I bring that with a basic background of law enforcement and commitment to excellence to improve our situation here in this county.
Our final question this evening is from College Republican Wesley Jackson.
How can the DA help reduce the amount of time that nonviolent offenders spend in the detention center?
Mr. D'Antonio.
Wesley, that's a very simple solution if you have the will and the commitment to do it. just by making a policy and implementing that policy and having everybody aware what the policy is, that these types of crimes, nonviolent crimes with first-time offenders, are going to be treated differently. Now, if you're a multiple-time offender, well, then you're going to be treated harshly. But if not, you're not going to be treated as you were a hardened criminal. There needs to be a distinction, Wesley, between people who do stupid things and people who are criminals. That's the DA's role. Remember, the DA is responsible for everybody in the county, not just victims, but the accused as well. So when I'm the DA, I'm going to implement policies that have a broad line and wide appeal. They're going to say, these are the types of people we're not going to advocate for jail. And these are the type of people we're going to advocate for jail. Everybody's going to have a clear understanding of that with no mistake.
Ms. Orlando.
Thank you. Thank you, Wesley. I will continue to do what we've been doing for 19 years, which is taking it case-by-case basis. I don't believe you can have a blanket policy for how you're going to set bail or bond. You have to take into account the victim's wishes, the community safety, the flight risk. All those things are argued before a judge. As I've indicated already, we have programs in place that take people out of the jail and never even get them in the system. The pre-prosecution diversion program, possibly reinstating the fast track if I would have cooperation from the defense attorneys. So those are things that would help to minimize the time that people would stay in the jail. But I will say it again, that I'm not going to apologize or ever say I'm sorry when I want to advocate and be a voice for somebody that has been a victim of a violent crime, that they have a loved one that has been killed, and that they have the right to come forward and voice what they want. That is my job, is to make sure that Doña County stays safe and that victims' voices are heard, and that we will continue to be the voice for those victims.
Thank you. I'm Fred Martino. Thanks so much to our candidates, to our students as well, and to you at home, our members who make in-depth local programming possible with your donations. Special thanks to Mark Legaretta of NM Edge for helping to organize tonight's debate. Have a great week.